Hey everybody, welcome back to the SuperBake podcast. I'm your host, Baker. Let's talk about stuff. Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. So apologies for not posting any episodes lately. I've had a few things come up that I've had to deal with, so I thought I would just take that time to take a short hiatus from the podcast, but I think now I've gotten everything pretty much settled, so now I'm going to try to get back into the rhythm of things. And so what I thought I'd do today is just give my review for the new Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes film that came out a month ago. I wanted to do this earlier, but just time got away from me. I had other things come up, so I just didn't have a chance. So here we go. Hopefully this will be a little insightful if you still haven't seen the movie yet. As always, spoiler alert. If you haven't seen the film yet and you don't want any spoilers, just this is your heads up. In preparation for this movie, I watched the previous 3 films in the new Planet of the Apes series. I watched Rise, Dawn, and War, and I really forgot how just awesome those movies are. I think overall, Rise was probably the weaker of the 3, but it's still really good. I think particularly towards the second half of the film, once Caesar kind of leads the revolution against the humans. Dawn, I think, I like War, but I think Dawn might be my personal favorite out of those 3 movies. I like Koba, the villain. He's great. His motivations for why he hates the human beings makes a lot of sense. He's just a great antagonist, and the whole movie itself is just fantastic. Although War was really good, I liked Woody Harrelson as the colonel, the antagonist of the film. They're all 3 just fantastic films. And I also just love the main character, Caesar. I like Maurice, the orangutan. I think he was probably one of my favorite characters in those series. They're just great movies. I've never seen the original Planet of the Apes films. Part of me wants to go back and watch them, but they're so old, I don't know how well they hold up. I've seen clips of them on YouTube, and just seeing the people in the ape costumes, I don't know, especially with like the technology in the new Planet of the Apes films. Granted, it looks a little dated in Rise, but it's still just really impressive. It's hard to kind of go back to those movies, but maybe someday I might go back and at least watch the first one and maybe give my review of that. But anyways, we'll get into Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. So the plot, just to very briefly describe it, this film takes place many generations after War for the Planet of the Apes. The main character, Caesar, is obviously long gone. The apes have become the dominant species of the planet. Humans have regressed to more of a feral state, and there's not as many of them. And the main character in this movie is an ape named Noah, who's part of a clan of apes that raise eagles from a young age. And that's a big part of their culture. His clan gets kidnapped by a group of ape raiders led by this evil ape named Proximus Caesar, who kind of takes the teachings of Caesar from the first 3 films and has kind of perverted them to his own devices. And Noah has to work together with a human named May in order to save his clan and get them back to safety. In a nutshell, that's the story of the film. So I guess first I'll just kind of give my brief thoughts about this film, just to summarize. And also kind of what I thought of the original 3 films too. I really love those movies. Like, as someone who went into them like really hesitantly because I wasn't familiar with the Apes series, I didn't know what to expect. I ended up just loving them, and this movie is fantastic too. I will say overall, I don't know if I consider this film quite as strong as the first 3, the first trilogy of the new Planet of the Apes series. Mainly just because I'm going to call that one like the Caesar trilogy, since Caesar's the main character, and this one's, I'm just going to call it part of the Noah trilogy, since this is supposed to be part of a planned new trilogy of 8 films. It's still really good, but I feel like it does kind of fall short slightly of the other 3, which for reasons that I'll kind of get into here shortly. But yeah, first and foremost, as far as like the characters go, like Noah as a main character he's fine. I think he works as more of a blank slate character for like the audience to kind of experience the events through. Like, one thing the original 3 and the Caesar trilogy had going for them was that we saw Caesar from the time he was raised as a young ape to when he becomes the leader of the apes when they take over the planet. So we get to see that timeline for him and kind of how he becomes who he is. And I think that that really works to those films' benefit. And this one, we're introduced to Noah once he's basically already grown up. We don't get to see him grow up. And as a result of that, we don't really get to see a lot of what informs him growing up. So, like, beyond the fact that he has some aptitude for technology, at least to a small extent, like there's scenes in the movie where he's working on like this electric spear, and he eventually figures out how to get it working. So he's clearly got an aptitude, at least some kind of very basic understanding of technology to an extent. But beyond that, we don't learn a whole lot about him, other than that he just wants to protect his clan, the people from his tribe. And I mean, and all that stuff's fine. And he works well enough as a protagonist. But compared to Caesar in the original, I just think that Caesar was, number one, way more interesting, thanks in no small part to Andy Serkis's performance. Noah, to me, just feels a bit of a downgrade in terms of like your main character. Like I said, there's not really a whole lot to him in terms of personality, so he's not that interesting, and especially compared to May's character, played by Freya Allan from the Witcher series. I think she definitely is probably the more interesting of the main characters in this one. She's probably the more morally gray of them. Like, she's this human that Noah runs into, and at first he thinks she's just some feral human, but then she reveals that she can speak, and she speaks quite well, and that she's way more intelligent than what he thought. Like, in this world, the apes think that the humans are like feral. They're kind of, the apes are the dominant species, and the humans are kind of seen as sort of like the lesser species now. Just because the apes have had, at least a few hundred years to kind of take control of the planet and really progress, in both their civilization and their culture. But May, she reveals that, she's very intelligent and that she's part of a group of people that were also intelligent. So it kind of, you kind of start thinking like, okay, so how many other people are out there like that? She is probably the more interesting of those two characters. Like, one thing I really like about her character is that even though we don't learn a whole lot about her, I'm guessing they're probably going to set this up for like future films, since they've already confirmed there's going to be at least 2 more. What I think they're probably going to do is reveal more about her in the next film, because there's definitely a lot about her that's left open to interpretation in this movie. But what I like about her is that we see a lot of her moral ambiguity. There is this scene where she has to take out this character, William H. Macy's character, who plays this character who works for the villain of the movie, Proximus Caesar. And she has to take him out because if she doesn't, he's going to reveal her and Noah's plan to take down Proximus. And in that scene, when she takes him out, like, you can see like the sorrow on her face. Like, there's literally tears coming out of her eyes, because the way I kind of interpreted that is she's taking out another human being and she doesn't want to, because she knows how few they are in number. But she's a survivalist. She's going to do what it takes to survive. And in her mind, the betterment of her species is top priority. Like, she doesn't want to hurt Noah. She doesn't want to hurt the apes. She doesn't get any joy out of potentially doing something that is going to hurt the apes. But at the same time, she sees the survival and longevity of the human race as her top priority, and she'll do whatever it takes to accomplish that. Which leads to her being more of a morally ambiguous character. Like, she's not necessarily evil. I wouldn't call her evil at all. But from the perspective of like Noah's character, you could definitely see like where some of her motivations could be questionable. And then there's the third character in the movie. There really are kind of, there's a few main characters, but the 3 main characters that I kind of focused on, and the 3 standouts for me, are definitely Noah, May, and the villain, Proximus Caesar, played by Kevin Durand, he's up there with Koba as far as being one of the better villains in this series. Like, I like Woody Harrelson as the Colonel from War, but like I said, Koba from Dawn was the best villain of the original trilogy, and I think Proximus is a fantastic villain too. He's played by Kevin Durand, who's a pretty big, imposing guy. In real life, he's like 6'6" or something like that. Like, the dude's a freaking beast. And Proximus is... One thing I like about him is, even though he's like a chimpanzee like Noah, like, he's not a gorilla. Like, there's a gorilla soldier in the movie who's kind of Proximus's right-hand man, who's very big and imposing, obviously, but they still go out of the way to make Proximus look so much bigger and more imposing than Noah. And even like the way he looks, like his eyes look different from Noah's. Like, Noah, they kind of give more human eyes, kind of like with Caesar in the original trilogy, but Proximus, his eyes look more like what you would expect like a chimpanzee's eyes to look like. It gives him more of an animalistic look, But it's funny because he speaks more articulately than Noah does. But even though like you can still tell when he talks, he kind of retains some of his animal instincts when he talks. It definitely feels like an animal that's speaking human language, which gives him this really creepiness, or this really creepy factor. Like it's like you don't know if he's going to snap at any moment. He always has like this unhinged like pattern to his speech that like you don't know if he's on the verge of just like ripping your head off. And even compared to Noah, who's a pretty good sized chimpanzee, like Proximus is huge. So it's like he's like a bodybuilder, you know, in chimpanzee form. So it's like he's even more imposing looking, which I think makes him that much scarier. But he was definitely the standout performance for me, besides the other two. Just every scene he's in, he's very imposing. He gives off this air of being like he's intelligent and articulate to an extent. But at the end of the day, he is still an animal, and he will absolutely kill you if he doesn't get what he wants. And of course, his whole motivation is he wants to, there's this vault that he's discovered, and he's basically enslaved a bunch of apes that he wants to force to open the vault because there's a bunch of human weapons in there that he wants to use for his own personal gain, basically to increase his power and his hold over the world. That's an element of this movie that I really liked, was that even though the apes are different from humans and they are essentially animals, what they show in this movie is that power corrupts, and that even though the apes, despite being animals, you would think would have this sense of nobility that humans don't, but they still are kind of like, you see examples of like Proximus, who he's corrupted by the idea of power. He wants these human weapons, and he's not afraid to sacrifice other apes to get to them. Like the part where they're trying to tear open the door, some of the apes get badly injured when the chains snap, and Proximus just doesn't seem concerned by that at all. He's just basically like, okay, we'll try again tomorrow. Like, he seems more annoyed and not concerned about the fact that several apes got badly injured by the chains when they snapped. And to me, I think that's how the film effectively highlights that, like, yeah, power corrupts anybody, not just humans, but even like the apes, who, even though they're now the dominant species and they kind of look back on the humans as being, you know, this very war-hungry, power-corrupted species, the apes are kind of going in the same direction, or at least a similar direction. It's also interesting, too, because that's what they did. They did something similar with Koba in Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, where Koba was corrupted because he was experimented on by humans. And that's something that Proximus tells about Koba, that he learned hate from humans and nothing else. You know, like, and you see Koba's character, he looks down on humans and thinks them as lesser than himself, but in many ways, he kind of inherited a lot of the traits from the humans that he himself hates. So, yeah, there's an interesting parallel between him and Proximus in this movie, but Proximus was definitely a standout to me. I guess the one thing about him that I didn't like was that it's not the character himself, it's the fact that he's only in about half of the film. He doesn't show up until, like, the second half, roughly. And the movie's about 2.5 hours long, so it's a long movie, which I'll kind of talk about that here in a little bit. But yeah, he doesn't show up until about halfway through, which was kind of a disappointment. Like, we don't really get to we see his influence from, like, the raiders that attacked Noah's tribe in the beginning of the film, but we don't see Proximus until much later. And I think that kind of works to the film's detriment. I really think that this would have worked better if we were introduced to Proximus Caesar much earlier in the film. One, because I think he really elevates the movie every scene that he's in. And second, it would have given us more time with him as a character to maybe learn a little bit more about his motivation, as well as maybe kind of his influence that he could have over Noah, or at the very least, Noah's response to him. Like, one thing about Noah's character in this movie is that we learn that Caesar from the original trilogy is kind of seen as sort of a messiah in this one. There's this character named Raka, this orangutan, who I was kind of thinking was going to be sort of like the Maurice of this story, and he is in some ways, kind of. But he shows up, and he's basically like, he is like supposed to be the last person or ape who spreads the teachings of Caesar from the original trilogy, the whole, you know, taking care of the humans, apes not hurting other apes. And he has like this necklace that he makes that sort of like symbolizes it's the window from Rise of the Planet of the Apes, the window from the attic that Caesar grew up in, which is a symbol that they have throughout the movies. And Raka is trying to he's trying to spread that. It's almost like a religion of like Caesar's beliefs and his teachings. But he's in the first half of the movie, and he's kind of teaching Noah about the Caesar's beliefs and his teachings. And then, and like, you know, he kind of viewed Caesar as like this figure who cared about the humans and didn't want war. And then you have Proximus in the second half of the film who kind of flips that, and he kind of perverts Caesar's teachings, where like he claims that he is trying to use what Caesar taught the apes to further their hold on the planet, but really all he's doing is he's just trying to get human weapons for himself. So I thought that was interesting. That whole dynamic in the film was interesting, kind of seeing like how they, again, like what I was saying before, power corrupting Caesar, him lying to the other apes, like using their strength to further his own personal agenda. So all that stuff is really interesting. And then, of course, the stuff with May's character. So like from a character perspective, I thought this movie was really good. William H. Macy feels a little underutilized in this film. He's in it. He's sort of like I guess, kind of like a human assistant to Proximus. I guess maybe like I don't know if he's supposed to be like I'm trying to think, what's the word? Like not like a translator, but just sort of like somebody who kind of advises him, I guess, on the ways of humans. But like we don't really see very many other human characters. So like there's one part where they run into a bunch of feral humans when the apes are chasing them. But yeah, I mean, William H. Macy, he's not in very much of the movie. He feels a little underutilized. I think the scenes that he's in, he does fine, I suppose. It's weird seeing him going from like Shameless into this, because he still looks like Frank from Shameless, but he just, I don't know, still has like that disheveled, unkempt look. I think that's just William H. Macy's general look now. He just always looks disheveled to me, but I don't know. He'll always be Frank Gallagher. I can never unsee Frank Gallagher in this one, or whenever I see him in anything else. So yeah, and then like Raka's character, again, I liked his character too. He has a strong presence, even though he's not in very much of the film. I don't want to go into too much spoilers about that. I'll kind of leave that to you when you go watch this. But I like his character as well. But like I said, the three standouts for me are definitely Noah, May, and Proximus. They're kind of the two main focuses of the story. It's interesting because you have Proximus, who is definitely what I would consider to be like just a straight up villain, and then you have Noah, who I would consider to be kind of just like a straight laced hero, and then you have May, who's sort of like, at least in my opinion, kind of the morally ambiguous character, at least from Noah's perspective. From the human perspective, I guess you could say that she's probably a good character. She's on the side of the humans. And she's kind of got her own mission that she's trying to accomplish as well. So I guess the other part that I'll talk about now is like the story, and also kind of the length of the movie too, because they do kind of tie into each other. The story overall in this one, it feels like it's setting up pieces for a bigger conflict that's going to come in a later film. I mentioned before that they've already said that this is going to be part of a new trilogy, and supposedly there's rumors that there's even going to be another trilogy after that. So we're going to get potentially 9 new Planet of the Apes films, including the original one with Caesar. So that's interesting if they do go down that route. But May's story in this one kind of feels like it's the main set piece for what's going to come in future films. Not to give away too much, I don't want to go into too much details here, but basically her focus is she is trying to find this device that will allow the humans to realign these satellite dishes so they can communicate with other human beings across the planet. And now they don't specifically state why they're wanting to do this, but you kind of get the impression that the humans are slowly trying to rebuild their civilization. Of course, since the apes are now the dominant species on the planet, you know that this is inevitably going to lead to conflict. So I'm guessing that this film is setting up for probably another war movie, although we already had War for the Planet of the Apes, so we're going to do another War for the Planet of the Apes. But yeah, it definitely feels like it's setting that up for the next one, where it looks almost like Noah and May are going to be kind of the two, I guess, leaders kind of duking it out in the next movie, or at least the next couple films. So I'm excited to see like if that is the direction they go in, which it definitely looks like that's kind of how the movie sets up for in the next one. I'm definitely excited to see like the direction they take that in. It would also be interesting too to see, like, since the humans are outnumbered, like how they're going to take down the apes, because the apes are obviously physically superior to them. They're bigger and stronger and faster. So I don't know if maybe the humans are going to discover, since they have the satellites, maybe they're going to discover some technology they can use against the apes, like guns. that is a point in the story. The apes are trying to get into the vault that has a bunch of it has a stockpile of weapons like rifles and stuff like that, which is what Proximus wants. I'm kind of curious if like maybe there'll be other vaults that the humans can access that they'll try to get weapons to use against the apes, and if that's something that they're going to set up in the next one. So yeah, like story wise, it feels like they're setting up for future conflicts in the next movie. Like the story in this one feels like it's definitely focusing more on the ape side of things, like Noah, his tribe trying to get everyone back to safety. And then the next one I'm guessing is probably going to focus more on the humans and them trying to rebuild. But it feels like it's definitely kind of just moving towards bigger story beats that are going to be coming in future film installments. So I'm curious to see how that's going to play out down the road. As far as I'm aware, nothing has been officially announced for like the next movie, although I'm guessing they're probably going to start working on it in the next year or two. But as far as I'm aware, nothing in concrete, nothing's been written in stone yet. So I guess we'll see on that. I do want to talk about the length of the movie a little bit. That's kind of another problem that I have with it. Beyond like Proximus Caesar not being in like very much of the film, like only showing up in the second half, the length of the film is also a bit of an issue for me. Like I said before, it's 2.5 hours. I'm really getting tired of this trend in Hollywood where they feel like bigger is always better. Like every movie that comes out now, I feel like it's just like over 2 hours long. It's like 2.5, 3 hours. Killers of the Flower Moon, I think, is supposed to be like longer than 3 hours, if I'm not mistaken. Like films are just getting so long now that it's getting to the point where I enjoyed this movie. Like I enjoyed my time watching it. I'm not trying to make it sound like I was miserable. I wasn't, but it's just getting to the point now where it feels like going to the movie theaters just feels like it's taking up a huge chunk of your day. I miss the days when we had just 90-minute films. I wish Hollywood would bring those back. I really would like to see more movies like that. But anyways, yeah, this movie is about 30 minutes. It's 2.5 hours long. I really feel like it could have probably had like 30 minutes cut out. Like every scene works, and every scene I think works to push the narrative along fine, but I don't know. It felt like there were definitely parts that were a little bit less interesting than others. Like I would say the film gets more interesting once Proximus shows up. The first half of the movie is probably the least interesting. I mean, everything leading up to when Noah's village gets attacked is interesting. And even when Noah's village gets attacked, that stuff is really good. It's the stuff in between then and when Noah is introduced to Proximus. That stuff was probably the weakest part of the film to me. Like, yes, it has some scenes where he's getting to know May's character a little bit, and it's also the part where he's introduced to Rocca's character and learns more about the teachings of Caesar from the first trilogy. But I don't know, to me, it just felt like they probably could have trimmed it up a little bit there and maybe tried to shorten the conflict between Noah and Caesar a little bit in the end. It's like a lot of that stuff kind of felt like, okay, we know what's going to happen. We know he's going to inevitably stop Proximus. So, I don't know. I feel like there were definitely moments where they probably could have shaved off, a few minutes here and there, and I think it would have helped overall with the flow of the film. But just in general, the movie definitely feels like 2.5 hours. Like, it's not a huge problem, but I definitely would have liked it if this was closer to like 2 hours or maybe even an hour and a half. I know it's a big Hollywood epic. I know with these Planet of the Apes films, Hollywood and the audience kind of expects Hollywood to produce these big epic films. So I get it, I guess, but I just wasn't a huge fan of that. Something else I want to talk about too is just the technology, like the special effects on the apes. Once again, I mean, this is the best it's ever looked. I mean, Rise, like I said before, looks pretty dated now, but it doesn't look terrible. But this movie, man, like some scenes, like some of the apes just look almost lifelike, especially like the gorilla character. He looked really impressive. Proximus looks really cool. Like one little detail I like about Proximus is that his iris are kind of like yellow, and there's almost kind of like this grayish color like in the whites of his eyes, which gives him like a really almost creepy, menacing look. Noah's character, he still has like the whites and around his eyes, kind of like a human eyes, like what Caesar has. Honestly, Noah to me, and I've kind of thought this about Caesar from the original trilogy too. I think it's because Noah has human-looking eyes. It almost kind of gives him this uncanny valley effect where, like, I know that's not a real ape. I mean, I know all the apes aren't technically real. They're human actors using mocap suits, and they're just going over them with CGI. But every time I see the apes, like Noah and Caesar with like the human eyes, I always kind of think like that doesn't look real. Like I know that that's not an ape. But the other ones all look really, really good. Like Rocco looks really good. Proximus looks incredible. Like a lot of the other apes look fantastic. The other animals they do also look kind of interesting too. They use real horses in this one, I'm guessing because they have actors actually riding the horses. But like the eagles that are part of Noah's clan that they train, their CGI, they look okay in some scenes. There's some scenes where you can definitely kind of tell, like, okay, that's a CGI animal. It's not super distracting. It's not like, I will say, the bear from Dawn of the Planet of the Apes that they encounter in the beginning of the film definitely looked fake. It seemed like most of the budget went towards the apes, and whatever was left over went towards other effects, like the bear. I always thought the bear looked kind of... It reminded me of the bear from The Revenant with Leonardo DiCaprio. Like, you can definitely tell it's not real. So yeah, like beyond that, like the special effects on like the eagles and stuff, that was not incredibly impressive, but it looked fine. It was serviceable. But yeah, like I mean, the technology just keeps getting better and better. Like I know this has probably been said before, but it's really hard to imagine CGI getting much better. Like, I mean, I'm sure it will. I know obviously 10, 15 years from now, I'm going to be blown away by it. And I'm sure the special effects of this movie probably won't look as impressive, but like just looking at some of the apes and some of the scenes in this, it's just like, it's hard to imagine CGI getting better looking. But yeah, I mean, this looks really good. I thought War looked incredible, but man, Kingdom, the special effects in this look fantastic. There are definitely some scenes in this that are just like jaw-droppingly gorgeous. Like me and my friend, we saw this in IMAX, and I definitely will say this is the kind of film that it deserves to be seen in a theater for sure, because it just feels like a big, expansive film. I don't go to movie theaters very often anymore, but this definitely feels like it should be seen on the big screen. So, in short, just to kind of quickly summarize my thoughts on this, overall, I am really enjoying the new Planet of the Apes film series, and I think this one is a fantastic entry into that series. I would say of the 4 new films that have come out so far, this one, not the weakest. I still would consider Rise to be the weakest of the 4, but this one I think would be below. For me, it's probably Dawn. War is a close second, and then Kingdom is third, and then Rise. So it's not the worst of the new films in my opinion, but it definitely feels like it's got some elements that kind of hold it back from being epic. Like I've said, Noah as a main character to me just was not as interesting as Caesar. I liked Caesar more as a main character. The length of the film feels like it's a little bit of a problem. Hopefully in the next one they can really either trim it down a little bit, maybe to just like 2 hours if they can, or at the very least just keep the pacing as even as possible and try to have as little dead space in between here and there. I like the character May. Proximus is a fantastic villain. I just wish he was in more of the film. And again, it feels like it's kind of setting up for bigger things that are going to be happening in future installments. So we'll just have to kind of see like what plays out later down the road. But yeah, I mean, if you like the trilogy with Caesar, I think definitely check this out. It's definitely worth checking out. I don't consider it quite as strong as Dawn or War for the Planet of the Apes, but it's still in my opinion, it's a worthy successor. And if just for nothing else, just based on pure spectacle alone, I think this film is hell of impressive to watch. And it definitely shows just how far along the technology for CGI has come. So yeah, this definitely gets a pretty strong recommendation from me. And with that, that's going to conclude tonight's episode. Like I said, I'm going to try to get back into a more normal routine for uploading my podcast episodes. So definitely continue to tune in. Once again, I'm on Anchor, Spotify, and YouTube. If you like what you heard, please feel free to like, share, and subscribe. And I will catch you all next time. Later.